Good morning, everyone. I hereby open this academic ceremony in which Pascal Heß will defend the academic thesis, How does salient information on economic prospects shape human capital investments? May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis?
Thank you very much. Dear Prorector, dear members of the committee, dear colleagues, friends and family, today I would like to present the results and conclusions of my thesis titled How does salient information on economic prospects shape human capital investments? Today's agenda is the following. I will start with a description of the topic of the thesis, followed by the empirical approaches I use to tackle questions raised by the topic. Lastly, I will draw conclusions from the results. Starting with the topic of the thesis and starting with a thought experiment. Imagine this person, let's call him Michael. Michael is 13 to 14 years old, and Michael is thinking about future labor market prospects, and he's thinking, in particular, he's thinking about working in occupation A. Attached to working in occupation A, he has some beliefs about wages and some beliefs about employment prospects. Economic models consider these as expected returns to working in occupation A. But there are also expected costs. And these costs are usually the human capital investments. And what we can now do is we give Michael some information about the wages and the employment prospects and the tasks that he has to do and the human capital investments he has to take for working in occupation A. And what we often observe is that afterwards, Michael reduces his beliefs about wages, for example. And this is because he is misinformed about the true wages in this occupation. But how is this possible? There are so many possibilities to inform yourself nowadays about occupations, about the wages, about the tasks, and about the employment prospects, that it's a big question how, with these big sources of information, a lot of people are still uninformed or misinformed about such important things. And the hypothesis in my thesis is that the information that is out there is simply not salient enough. I define information to be salient if it is readily available, it is easy to understand, and it must seem at least relevant. Now, coming to the empirical approaches in which I investigate settings in which the information is perceived as differently salient. In my empirical approaches, I use observational studies. That means we're looking at real-life examples outside of lab or field experiments. Starting with the first empirical chapter, there I investigate the effects of the minimum wage introduction in Germany in 2015 on teenagers' educational plans. From a conceptual point of view, what this means is that if the average wage is above the minimum wage, there will be nothing happening. But if the wage is below the minimum wage, then there will be a wage increase. And this will be the same for the beliefs about wages. Connected to the beliefs about wages, there is a belief about the employment prospects. That means that if the difference between your beliefs about the wages before the minimum wage introduction and after the minimum wage introduction is relatively large, then it might be that you fear to become unemployed. However, these two effects are going into opposite directions with respect to human capital investments. While the wage increase reduces human capital investments, the reduction in employment prospects increases human capital investments based on the neoclassical model, and therefore it is unclear ex ante whether we find positive or negative effects or no effects on human capital investments. What we do empirically is that we compare students from highly affected regions to barely affected regions, which is our baseline, group. The outcome in this is that the educational plan to invest more than just getting the basic secondary degree in Germany. And we compare students from barely affected regions to students from different regions with a different gradation of effectiveness. And so group number 5, for example, are the highly affected regions. And we see that for those students, for the intermediate track students, which we wouldn't perceive as future minimum wage workers, we do not see any effect of the minimum wage on educational plans. So it's not different from zero. But if we look at lower track students, we see that there is still no change in educational plans for different regions. But if we look at the highly affected regions, there is a strong positive change in educational plans. That means they are more likely to pursue more than just the basic secondary education in Germany. Getting back to the conceptual conceptual framework, what does that mean? So we have an increase in human capital investments, and in turn this means that these students that reacted were highly afraid of becoming unemployed. Okay? And this finding is especially special because teenagers are exempt from the minimum wage they are exempt from the minimum wage up age 18. That means they have 3 to 4 years still where they are fully exempt from the minimum wage, and still we find this effect. And this shows how salient this policy of the minimum wage was. There were not only newspaper articles about it, or not only economists wrote about it, but there were also YouTube influencers talking about this. And also the career counselors went into schools and talked about the minimum wage. And this is a blueprint of how a policy can affect basically choices of people that only have prospective amounts of stakes in that policy. So that means that low-skilled students can be forward-looking to some extent. In the second empirical chapter, I look at low-skilled students, and especially I'm investigating the expansion of a school-to-work transition program on educational attainment and early labor market outcomes. This school-to-work transition program supports students in the way that they support, for example, if you have problems in math, they organize tutoring, or they organize psychological treatment, and they help you with applying for apprenticeships. What I did there is I compared regions that saw an expansion to regions that would have seen an expansion if they were not part of an economically stronger NUTS 2 region. That means that I'm basically comparing districts that are of similarly economic power. And what I find is that this, the expansion of this program induced a strong increase in participation rates and total costs, but there is no effect on educational attainment and also no effect on early labor market outcomes. However, there is light at the end of the tunnel, namely that the quality of coaching has some positive correlations with early labor market outcomes. And this means that if you have a strong decrease in the constraints of information, then there might be positive effects. But if the students, if the teenagers are not aware of the benefits that the program can have for their future, they will possibly not participate until the end. And now you might say, now you're looking at low-skilled teenagers only, but they might not be the perfect group to investigate information because they have problems to assess these information and to reproduce this information and do choices based on these. So in the third chapter, I'm looking at high-skilled teenagers. And especially we're having the question whether a mismatch between occupational preferences and subsequent major choice leads to higher dropout rates at university. Because this is very complicated, let me quickly start with the conceptual framework that we had. First, we measure preferences for occupations before they enter university, so during school. In the second step, we measure their actual choice. But their actual choice, in contrast to choosing an apprenticeship, if you go to university, your actual choice is not an occupation, it's a major. But these major also can lead to typical careers. So we have a data-driven approach to map majors to occupations. And what we then do is we say, if your major leads to the typical career of occupation Y, this is considered a match. But if the major you chose does not lead to occupation Y as a typical career, this is considered a mismatch. And we find that a mismatch does lead to higher dropout rates. And the reason for this is that students are largely indecisive before they enter university. That means they have no idea what occupation they want to work in, then they choose a major, and this likely does not lead to the desired occupation that the preference is formed during the studies. And what it also means is that we, in Germany, in this case, we should reduce the constraints to form preferences for occupations and for majors. And lastly, I'm investigating workers, which you might say they are much more attached to the labor market, so they have more ideas about what they can earn and what the employment prospects are. In the last chapter, I asked the questions whether workers who work in jobs that can be replaced by robots compensate for their lower future employment prospects by investing in further training. Conceptually, what we compare are occupations that are affected by robotization, for example, occupation B, and occupations that are not affected by robotization, for example, occupation C. What we then show is that workers in occupation B face lower wage growth and lower employment growth, which can have negative effects in the long run. In occupation C, this is not the case. And what we then propose is that workers in occupation B should invest in further training to compensate for these negative paths that they are on now, but we find that they don't. And the reason for this is that these workers underestimate the risk automation poses on the employment prospects in their occupation. To conclude, my thesis shows that the salience of information is important at all levels of education and age groups, and that large one-time shocks like the minimum wage introduction are more noticeable to people than similarly threatening but slow changes, for example, technological change. And with this, I would like to give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you for your introduction, Mr. Heß. Now we get to the opposition, and the opposition will be opened by Professor Goldstein. He is Professor Human Capital and Social Economics at Maastricht University. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear Pascal, congratulations on finishing the thesis. I liked it very much. You study important questions, use rich and interesting data, and you show to possess a high level of knowledge of econometric techniques. The fact that you already published 2 papers in very highly ranked journals is quite impressive. And I'm sure that the other 2 papers will also be published in similar outlets. I have 2 questions, methodological questions about chapter 3. You use a synthetic difference in differences design to study the effect of an expansion of a school-to-work program called BEB on educational or early career outcomes. The program aims to support young individuals who are at risk of leaving school without a diploma. BEB has 4 objectives: reducing premature school dropouts, enhancing occupational knowledge, increasing regular training replacements for school leavers, and lowering training dropout rates. So you compare counties that received additional funding to counties that would have received additional funding if the decision about the distribution of funds had been made at the county level rather than at the coarser NUTS2 level. And that sounds random to me. And therefore I was wondering, why don't you use an IV instead of a difference in differences design? That's question 1, and especially because in the difference in differences design, you have to have common trends, and you have to use a trick for the trends to be common, called synthetic difference in differences. So instead of using this trick, did you maybe explore this seemingly random treatment? That's question 1. And question 2 is just something I wondered about, is that in this synthetic difference in differences, it implies, I think, that you use weights to make the control group and the pre-treatment group comparable. And that's very smart, but because then you can make the trends parallel pre-treatment. But I think it's more difficult to interpret the results in that case, because you use these weights. So when using these weights, how do you interpret the results, interpret the coefficients? That's question 2.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words, and thank you very much for the very interesting 2 questions. Starting with the first question on whether I should using an IV or whether the assignment of the treatment is random. I have doubts that the treatment is random at the individual level. There are several possibilities for why a student can be, particularly the low-skilled, that fare worse at school than others, why these students are picked for this program. And there could be, for example, purely academic reasons. They are bad at school. There could also be psychological problems that they have to solve. And also there could be problems at home that the coach can help solving. Everything that prevents them from getting an apprenticeship after school should be solved. This is the basic idea of the program. The problem is that I neither can observe grades, I can also not observe whether they have psychological problems, and I cannot observe whether they have problems at home. That means for me, when using an IV, I at least have to know how the treatment assignment, how that process works, and that I can observe it to make it random, right? Conditional on these conditional on these controls. And I cannot do this. That's why I refrained from going into an IV. When we talk about the simple diff and diff, what I wrote in my paper, or what I wrote in this chapter, is that with the synthetic diff and diff, I compare regions with a different weight to the treated regions. And I do this instead of a usual diff and diff because there is evidence that I tested that the pre-trends do not hold for the labor market outcomes, which is no surprise. And maybe I have to make that more explicit in this chapter. So I tested the diff and diff with the labor market outcomes. The pre-trends were significant. And that's why I thought, okay, let's go back, take one step back, use the synthetic control method, and then you kind of weight the pre-treatment outcome to be similar in development to the treated region outcomes. Of course, using a diff and diff would be much better because it's more credible, because you don't have to do a lot of data work. But in this case, I think it's quite reasonable. What I've also tested is using the diff and diff in the same labor market region as the treated regions. This works out. But then I suffer from very low numbers of observations when I go into the... I then have to go to the individual level again. And jumping back and forth in the level of observation is, in my opinion, not very helpful for the reader. The second second question was regarding whether the interpretation of the effects using weights. So what the paper that this method is based on shows is that the effects can be interpreted as ATT, so the average treatment effect on the treated. Because of this, I have no doubt that it can be interpreted as this, which is no different from the regular diff and diff results, right? It's just another method, I would say, to get the parameter of interest. I wouldn't say that the interpretation changes. It's just, it's just a tool with some other assumptions. That's maybe it. The synthetic diff and diff has other assumptions than the usual diff and diff, but the parameter of interest is the same. Yes, I hope that answered your question.
It does. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor De Grip. He is Professor in Human Capital Information and the Labour Market at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidate, dear Pascal, also my congratulations with your excellent thesis. It includes 4 very interesting empirical studies, and as Professor Goldstein already mentioned, 2 of them are published in high-ranked journals, so that reflects the quality of your work. The question or questions I have are on your first study, chapter 2, which goes into, as you just explained, the effect of the increase of minimum wages on the further investments in education. And I don't want to challenge your outcomes, I think they stand, but I want to challenge your explanation for this. You say that comes because they anticipate the worst future labor market perspective due to this increase of the minimum wage. I have an alternative explanation. I want to ask you to reflect on this. Couldn't it be that usually when minimum wage increases, the entire wage building increases? So also the wages of the skilled workers increase. In that case, opportunity costs remain the same because the youngsters are exempt from the minimum wage. So then when there would be an increase of the wages of the skilled workers due to the increasing race floor, then the returns on investments increase. So please reflect on this. And in your empirical work, you go into this difference between regions, and you define then very interesting, the high bite regions in which there are many youngsters below the level of the minimum wage. But I'm not fully sure on this, but I couldn't find it. I might also expect that it's also due to the fact that in these regions, which have high bite regions, there are many workers working as apprentices, because the apprentices are also exempt from this minimum wage. So in that case, you actually go into a finding that you say in very thin markets for low-skilled workers, the effect is is strongest. And it also can give you the urge to invest in this human capital of an apprenticeship, because of the very thin market if you don't. And that also is on my last question, which is then, I framed it as the external validity. Yeah, we all know that Germany is well known by its apprenticeship training for the craft workers. Typical countries as the US or UK don't have that, which means that when you're low skilled in the US or the UK, you have ample opportunities to climb the ladder later by firm specific training when you have employment in a firm. Whereas in Germany, when you're not in a market of being a craft worker, you're in, as I mentioned, a very thin market, very vulnerable for late career employment. So these were my 3 points. Please give your reflections on these.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your very kind words. Also, thank you very much for your interesting questions. Coming to the first question on whether the wage increase not only affected people at the lower part of the wage distribution, namely below the minimum wage, but also above. And this is something that has been shown in other work, that it indeed changed also the wages of people that are at the margin of earning a bit more than the minimum wage, but it flattens over the wage distribution. The thing is that the realized outcomes on the labor market are absolutely not central to this study, to this chapter, because we're looking at expectations. The survey for which we find, or the wave for which we find effects for the high-bide regions was done in December 2014 and January 2015. That means for those students to be able to expect, so what it basically means is low-skilled students would have had to already expect the labor market to develop in the way it did before the labor market developed and before even experts were sure about what has happened. So what has been basically, what the general discussion about was who will be affected by the minimum wage and how will this affect their labor market prospects. There were no discussions about whether those who are slightly above the minimum wage are also seeing a wage increase. The discussion was fully about those who will become unemployed. And I think this was the reason why these teenagers reacted, because they were just afraid of becoming unemployed regardless of whether they have to do an apprenticeship later on, and this is also not part of the minimum wage, it's also exempted, as you mentioned. But in the end, I would say the answer to question 1 is the returns on investment, the increasing returns on investment was not foreseeable for these teenagers. The second question was about whether in these high-bide regions there might be a lot of apprentices, because they may be, for example, also this may be also substituted for cheap labor. How we measure the bite is that we use only fully employed, no apprentices, no marginal employed workers, but only fully employed, regular employed persons and their hourly wage. For those persons aged 18 and 19, so the slightly older peers. So the concern that the apprentices in the high-bide regions are driving the effect, for example, or the returns to investment to these is, in my opinion, not a valid one. Concerning your last question, I absolutely share the concern that it might be difficult to have external valid conclusions from this study to other situations, to other labor markets, to other institutions in different countries. Of course, What you can do and what we can say is that in Germany still a lot of teenagers and also young people under the age of 25, they have the opportunity to retrain and to upskill. I would say this is no different from the US or UK. Of course, the situation, the very direct labor market institution of the minimum wage in a combination with a strong apprenticeship market, this may be a concern for external validity, but not necessarily whether the low-skilled have no opportunities to or upskill. And I hope with this I answer your questions.
Yeah, you surely did. I was very pleased also that you indeed not included the apprenticeships in the bite, which for me as a non-German was not fully clear in the chapter yet. I think it was convincing to some extent that you say, they only knew about this worse labor market perspectives because that was in the news. But to be honest, it's not so much in your study. Am I clear on this, or do you think the high bite region really stands for this argumentation?
Well, maybe I have to do a bit more work on this stand to say really, okay, this was only due to the media discussions and, for example, the videos from YouTube influencers that only summarized what German economists basically said, right? They predicted strong losses for the low-skilled, for teenagers, and for East Germans. And this is basically what we find in the study. These are the people that react to the policy.
I don't know if you're in favor of this, but some mixed method then would also help a bit, eh? Yeah.
Yeah. In the aftermath, maybe it's a bit difficult, but yeah, that's true.
Thank you very much.
Now the opposition will be continued by Professor Uhlendorf. He's a member of the assessment committee and he is with us online, and he is Professor of Economics at the Institute of Polytechnique in Paris. The floor is yours.
Yes, thanks a lot, dear candidate, dear Pascal. I also want to congratulate, and I have to say that I'm very happy to be invited to be part of this committee, and I really enjoyed reading your thesis, and I think it is a very insightful piece of work. And I think all the papers are very well written, and the research is really very well executed. And something I really like a lot is all these papers, they are dealing with very relevant and interesting policy questions. So really, I congratulate to this excellent work. And the other said that already. Now, I mean, one sign of that is that you already published 2 papers, and I think the other 2 papers will also be published in good journals or very good journals very soon. So I have one question about the second paper, so your chapter 3, about the evaluation of the school-to-work transition program for the low-skilled students. So I think first, I mean, in general, I think this is a really nice and important contribution to the literature. And I think, I mean, from a policy perspective, it's quite a disappointing, I mean, important but disappointing result, because you really convincingly show that there are no effects of this policy, at least if we look at the aggregate at the county. So, and this is a nice feature of your work. No? You are basically able to measure the overall effect of this policy, taking into account potential displacement effect. But this kind of brings me to my question. I mean, basically it implies that we do not really know whether there's a zero effect of your policy because there's no effect on the treated, so no effect at the individual level, or whether this zero effect is basically driven by strong displacement effects within counties. I mean, you convincingly kind of tell us in the paper that there are probably no displacement effects across counties, and I believe that, but there might be strong displacement effects within counties. And I'm wondering what you think about that. So whether you think or whether you have any insights on whether there are really no effects on the treated or whether there might be effects on the treated and strong negative effects on the untreated individuals. And to go a bit further, so I was thinking about what we can do, and maybe one thing one could do is to exploit heterogeneous effects depending on the labor market tightness, because these displacement effects, they should be different depending on the labor market tightness. I'm wondering whether you thought about that, whether you see a way to address this question, or whether we would in some sense need maybe in the end an experimental design where we, like in the paper of Crépin, Duflo, Radlow and co-authors, where we kind of randomly vary the intensity of, or the share of treated individuals in regions.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words. Also, thank you very much for your question. Yes, indeed. In this chapter, I look at aggregate effects of a school-to-work transition program and its expansion, because I mentioned already earlier to the question of the first opponent that I have no information that would lead me to use an IV, for example, for investigating the individual effects of this program. And there might be displacement effects within the county, but since I aggregate this to the county level, I don't think that a displacement effect in whatever direction would affect the results, I have to admit. So so displacement within the district would basically lead to other people being part of the program instead of the people that most need it, or maybe there are displacement effects that I'm not thinking about now. But your idea with the labor market tightness is a very good one, and I started to investigate this by using labor market regions as the level of investigation. Yeah, in that regard, I can only say that this is this is something that I want to do in future work. Regarding the individual effects, again, I think there must be something like an experiment that exogenously vary the treatment length, for example, of the program, to see at what point this really, this program really shows effects. And also, we kind of have to think about how we can make students or participants more persistent in the program, because what I also show is that the program had a dropout rate of 50% almost in treated and control regions throughout the program, and I think this is the most important problem. If we could have like 90% of the participants staying until the end of the program, this would probably already help. But yeah, there has to be work done to improve the program. Yeah, and I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, maybe I can quickly follow up about my point about the displacement effect. So what I have in mind is that these are labor market regions where probably not many apprenticeship positions, for example. And you have a queue of young people who want to enter these apprenticeships. And what you change with your program, you just change the order in the queue. So you put the treated among the non-treated, and then the non-treated who would have had a position without this intervention now don't have one. So basically, you just simply change the queue, but you don't change the overall employment rate. And this is something you might have, and you measure, in the end, a zero effect at the county level. At the second point, just to your, I mean, I agree with what you said in the second point, just one small add-on to that. I mean, if the program really has no effect, then dropping out seems to be rational. I mean, the dropout rate, I'm not sure whether it's probably a problem, but if there's no effect, as you claim, of the program, then maybe dropping out is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Yes, so the displacement effect you just mentioned is the one that I started investigating this program with, basically. And with this aggregate approach, of course, I do not have the chance to disentangle the displacement effect from aggregate effects. That's true. For this, we need to have some kind of individual level experimentation or some exogenous variation where we can identify causal effects with. With this approach, of course, this is not possible. That's true. I will take that with me. And when so if the program has no effects, actually, then dropout might be rational. And this is probably something that that we've learned from another study that investigated the introduction of this program. That coaches often focus on the most severe cases that have problems to finish school, not even with a degree, but they are about to drop out in grade 8 or 9 even, and they focus on these students, and it might be an idea to select or to exogenously select participants with a different set of skills and a different set of pre-individual or individual characteristics prior to the experiment. And this is something I think we need to still find out about the program. I mean, it's so expensive, and we still don't know very basic things about how that actually works. And I think this is a very good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
The opposition now will be continued by Professor Backes-Kellner. She is also with us online, a member of the assessment committee, and she's Professor of Business Economics, Personal Economics and Empirical Research at the University of Zurich. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Rector, dear candidate, dear Pascal. First, let me start by apologizing for not being able to be in Maastricht today, but I would have loved to be there, and I'm happy and thank the committee for making an online participation possible. Congratulations also from my side, Pascal, on finishing such a nice thesis. I very much enjoyed reading it. I think you raised a very important topic for research and for educational policy making by looking into the role of salient information, as you call it, on educational decision making. Your results document that salient information is very important to shape actual behaviors in education. So educational policymakers should care about how to better provide digestible information, as you call it, at different stages of the educational decision making. And I like your clever use of different data sources, your up-to-date methodologies, and the thoroughness of your empirical analyses and your careful interpretations. But of course, some questions always remain in the end. And I have two questions for you today, but let me start with one, and then let's see if we have more time for the second one later. My first question is on linking the results across the four main chapters. In chapter 5, so your last chapter, you find this detrimental pattern that firms do not invest in training for workers whom they plan to substitute by robot technology. And you find that those same workers do not compensate for the lack of their firm's training support by their own individual training decisions. Of course, their lack of training then will have negative effects on their long-run employment prospects. So any information that could help such vulnerable workers take more beneficial training decisions should be much appreciated. Now, in the previous chapters of your dissertation, you study the role of information for the improvement of educational decision-making, and you analyze how the provision of different types of information could enhance such educational decisions. So my first question for you is, What lessons can you draw from the first 4 chapters, or the first 3 main chapters, for solving the problem that you find in this 5th chapter? With your dissertation, you should now be an expert on how to best provide information given different types of circumstances. So what information do you expect to be helpful for individual training investments in the context of automation, roboterization, digitalization, and IT? Can you transfer or generalize some of your results from the first chapters for solving the problem of the last chapter, and how?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words. Also very sad that you cannot be here. Also, thank you very much for your question. Of course, the question to how to solve the problems that are raised in chapter 5, they are important ones, and so I have 2 answers for this. The first one is there is already work now that shows that workers who work in occupations that are affected by automation, they underestimate the effect, or they underestimate how prone they are to automation. This is shown by, for example, Philipp Lerchet-Pora and co-authors in a very new discussion paper. The second way I would like to answer this is what I've learned from chapter 2 to 4 in how we should shape information is that we should have an active policy of how we want to disseminate information, especially when it comes to negative or potential negative effects on employment prospects and also on wage prospects. It's not only about getting unemployed, but it's also wage losses. For example, if you have high numbers of turnover, then you will also lose wages on the way. I think the first empirical chapter on the minimum wages showed that there is a way with the help of career counselors, not only YouTube influencers, but also the career counselors that have to go into firms, that have to approach the workers. So we need a proactive stance on disseminating information instead of a passive one. For now, I think in Germany the problem is that people must gather the information themselves. I think in the Netherlands, I once received a letter that said, look, you might be eligible for something, check it, right? This is not really the case in Germany. I think we need to be more proactive in approaching people that might be affected by something. Of course, this is difficult to go into firms and tell them, look, your occupation will be paying less and your employment prospects are bad, because this would lead the firms to lose the workers, and this could also accelerate the employment, the lower employment prospects and also the lower wage prospects. I think what we can learn from chapter 4 for chapter 5 is that we need a bit of time also in the labor market, also for high-skilled people to experiment. I think this is what chapter 4 really shows, is that even if we look at high-skilled people, they need some time to form their preferences. And I hope this answers your question.
Yes, just one quick question back. You focused on the information that is on the risk of being unemployed and bad employment prospects. Wouldn't it also be important to have better information on what type of training they should do? Isn't that one big problem as well? They may be even aware that it would be good to do something, but they have no clue about what to do.
There are efforts currently at the Federal Employment Agency to foster or to create portals, let's say, that kind of lead people to the right training decision, to the right course. But this is something that must be evaluated in another study, of course. But that's of course something that we need to do. we need to inform also people about what kind of human capital investments they have to do if we say that they have to do some. Yeah, thanks.
The opposition now will be continued by Professor De Wolf. She's Professor of Co-Creation and Evaluation in Education at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidates, I also want to congratulate you with your excellent thesis. I think information is a very powerful policy instrument, and you showed 4 very interesting and creative empirical chapters of high quality, as was already stated by my colleagues, because 2 of them are already published and the others will be. But what I also liked is the variation in the papers. So there were 4 very different topics, very different data sets, and very different techniques you use. So you're kind of, you really showed your academic skills in the 4 papers. So congratulations. But I'm here to ask a question, and my question is also about chapter 3. In this chapter, you study the effects of what you call the Berufseinstiegsbegleitung. Sorry for that. For low-skilled teenagers, and as my colleague already asked a question about, you use synthetic differences in difference techniques for that. And then you find, as you really showed very clearly in figure 3.3, that there are no effects at all. And you kind of seem a bit disappointing about these results. During the chapter, you kind of test and explore various reasons of this zero effect you find over there. So first you explore whether there might be positive selection in the program. You also say that it might be due to the low coaching intensity. You also state somewhere that it might be due to that there are no performance bonuses within the program. That might be also a reason. And you also explore the quality of the coaching and the programs. Might also have to do something with that. But I was wondering what you find of another explanation, and that's that there's simply no effect of this program. And I think this is very much in line with the previous study. You also, it's not a synthetic difference in difference study, but the matching studies of 2015. You already referred to this paper in your program. And they didn't find an effect on the outcomes, although there were very positive experiences. And that's what we often see. People find it or experience these kind of programs as very positive, but when you look at the overall outcomes in the end, that very often you don't find any effect at all. So I got 2 questions, especially from a policy perspective. So could it be that there's no effect at all, and you kind of, you just reproduced with better techniques the study of 2015, and there's simply no effects? And my second question, if you were asked, or if the 4.5 million yearly euros were given to you, what kind of policy would you suggest in order to improve the transition from school to work for these low-skilled teenagers? Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your very kind words. Also, thank you very much for the 2 questions. Yeah, that there might be simply no effect, that's a possibility. But as an academic, if I find no effects in the main outcomes, I have the duty to find the reasons for this no effect. This is why the chapter is getting longer and longer over time with some tests and some ideas that I have that might explain these null results. So it might be that there is no effect, but I want to rule it out as much as possible because in my position I also do policy consulting and I don't want to consult people with wrong information. That's why I have to make it very strict, very strong, that there is no result of the program, and also I have to kind of make sure that there is no subgroup, that there is no kind of coaching intensity or something that really helps people in the end. So yeah, so I do a lot of things, but I cannot rule out that there is simply no effect of the program, which would be very sad, because I think it's a very good idea to help these low-skilled teenagers to to manage the transition from school to work. To the second question, what kind of program would I suggest? I would definitely go into the same direction, but maybe I would take from the, if I could wish everything that I could, that I would do something similar that, which, for example, the paper of Resniansky and co-authors did. They did a one-to-one mentoring with a slightly older peer. And I think this is very helpful because these low-skilled teenagers, they very often have trust issues with respect to strangers, and a coach is a stranger. And if there is high turnover of coaches within the program, within one class, for example, they won't get the trust of the teenagers. And I think having someone to trust, this would be the way to go. Of course, to scale it, you need a lot of slightly older peers. But in the perfect world, I think such a mentoring program or such a coaching program would definitely help, and I would invest in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The opposition now will be continued by Dr. Q. Nelen. She is Associate Professor of Lifelong Development and Employability at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, dear Pascal, also from my side, first my congratulations to your thesis. I have read it with a lot of pleasure. Your chapters are very policy relevant and show highly academic quality. I was very pleased to read that you have been able to share your findings already with many policymakers, even though I saw in your proposition that it also costs a lot of time. My question is related to Chapter 5, in which you analyze the influence of automation technology on workers' training participation, and is slightly related to the question from Professor Bakkens-Gellner. In section 5.2, you compare the findings of Innocenti and Gollin to your own findings. And while they find that workers exposed to automation have a higher intention to train, you find that a higher exposure is related to lower actual training participation. And you conclude that workers in automation-exposed occupations are too credit constrained to invest in training while they are actually willing to do so. However, in your conclusion chapter, you state that providing salient information is crucial, as workers are usually unaware of slow developments, even if information is publicly available. Also, in your summary chapter, you state that the findings of Chapter 5 suggest that individuals do not view technological developments as a threat to their employment or wage growth. I am wondering, though, to what extent providing information would then actually help to reduce the automation training gap, given the prior discussion of your findings in relation to the findings from Innocenti and Gollin. Could you please share your thoughts on this, somewhat contradictory statements, and discuss potential other ways to reduce the automation training gap than providing workers with salient information? Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words, also for this very interesting question. I think Chapter 5 shows that there is not only credit constraints going on, because if the reasons were only credit constraints, then we wouldn't find the effects, for example, not only for firm-financed training, but then we would also find a positive effect for training that was, for example, taken up with the support of government funding. But there is evidence that actually government funding is not taken up at high rates. So in the end, the basic conclusion would be that there must be some problems, or there must be some misperceptions of these people with respect to the technological change and with respect to the automation risk that they face in the end. And what I've also already said before is that there is now current work that shows that actually those who are most affected by technological change, those who have a high automation risk, they misperceive that and underestimate the risk. And this is why They do not have the incentive to train because they don't think that they know probably that there is technological change, but they don't know that this is affecting them personally. But what this paper also shows is, and this is very credible in their case, what they also show is that they then want to invest more in further training if they get informed about it. So I think the problem of salient information is, in this case, it's a very strict one. It's a very strong one. And
Please finish your answer.
yeah, and to be very short, I think the salient information problem can be solved for the people that are at high automation risk. Thank you very much.
Mr. Heß, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company will await the results of our deliberation and our return in this very room. Thank you.
The PhD defense has now ended. The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Southside, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. Southside, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. What's on the line? I know you know that I can't reach years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Mr. Heß, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Fouage is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to take the floor now.
Please all rise.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Pascal Heß, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university. Dear Dr. Heß, dear Pascal, I think it would be better if you moved back to Bamberg. These, more or less, must have been the words that I said to you in October 2020. And within a couple of weeks, you were back in Germany. So before misunderstandings arise and people think I'm not happy you standing here, let me explain to the audience what has been going on at that time. So ROAM and the German IAB have a well-established cooperation, and in 2019, Professor de Grip informed me that he had spotted an ambitious scholar, researcher at IAB and suggested I got in touch with him to discuss the options of doing a PhD at ROA. So when I did, that was Pascal. So Pascal and Bianca married and moved in Maastricht by the end of 2019. And he started his PhD in January 2020. Within 3 months, Pascal was exposed to 2 types of viruses. First, the cyber attack that hit Maastricht University in the Christmas of 2019. Then, in March 2020, the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. And you can imagine that for a young family, for Pascal, Bianca, and Amira, so he was productive not only with his PhD, but also in terms of children. One more will be coming later in my speech. So for a young family, the COVID-imposed restrictions made it impossible to develop a social life. So for your well-being, Pascal, and that of your family, sending you back to Bamberg was, I think, the best HR decision I could take. It was a painful one, but I think a necessary one. And by then, we didn't know that COVID will be coming with a second wave and a third wave. So it was really a big, good decision. But it meant quite a lot for all the interactions that we engaged in. And it changed a little bit the nature of our interactions. Nevertheless, I must say that your work as a PhD did not suffer from that. I mean, as a matter of fact, we just heard 2 of your papers have been published already. I just heard from Silke that the other one was submitted last night for review, so that's great. And also, you still remained very present at ROA, despite not being physically present at the institute. So let me elaborate a little bit on these 2 aspects of you, the scholarly aspects of who you are as a person and the social skills that you have, because you need them to stay present in an institute, one not being at that institute. So first, Pascal, the scholar. So I had a bit of a chat with Silke to prepare this speech. So she told me that your high school grades were not great at all. Right? As a matter of fact, it's a bit of a miracle that you end up in a PhD position. But as it turned out, you became top of the league in Jeffrey Woolrich's econometrics course in the Bavarian graduate program in economics. Much to the surprise of Silke, she still cannot believe that, but I think it really marks a kink in your learning curve. And I understand that also IAB rejected 2 of your applications to be part of the graduation program, and I'm very happy that we at ROA could offer you this place to grow and to learn and to become the scholar that you now are. So I think Professor de Griep was exactly right. You are an ambitious scholar, and I really believe that you know the change of the environment and the new colleagues that you experience here really help you develop yourself as a scholar, to contribute with impact to the scientific debates. Now, the papers that you publish are proof of that. Also to contribute to the knowledge of your students. You always did very well in your teaching provision, but also in the policy debate. And I think the latter is also very important because that makes you really a complete scholar. So these scientific achievements really are the outcomes of your efforts and your determination to make it as a scientist. And this ability that you have to stay calm, you showed that today, and we observe that, your ability to stay calm, to remain creative, to work hard and overcome difficulties is quite impressive. And you really grew as a scientist, and Silke and I are very proud about your achievements. Second, the social Pascal, or Kaspal, as you like to call yourself. Of course, we all know about your love for soccer and beer. And it's probably you are the only FC Nuremberg fan that dares drink a Belgian La Chouffe beer. And Silke also told me that not only you did econometrics with Woolrich, but you also played soccer with him. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I also drank beer with him.
Okay. So I do hope that Amira and Milan, so Milan is the second child produced in the period of the PhD, will have a choice when deciding which kind of sport to engage in. But I'm a bit afraid that they don't have that much choice. But anyways, I hope. So, but there are deeper things to say about you, except your love for football and beer. So there is a lot more to say about your social skills. And I would like to pinpoint 2 things. Your optimistic behavior, you as an optimistic person, and your friendliness. These are 2 characteristics of you that are quite striking. So your optimism helps you deal with these difficult situations that you come across. I mean, the COVID was one of them, still you never let down. And I think your optimism is both contagious and reassuring. When facing issues in the papers and the finalization of the PhD process, I was never worried when we encountered issues with data or with the match with theory, because you always gave me the impression, or us the impression, that you were in control and that things will turn all right. Your friendliness is salient, to use one of the words from the title of your PhD. It is salient for at least 3 things. First, it's highly visible and striking when first get in touch with you. So there's no way you can look around that. Second, it sticks. Even 3.5 years after leaving ROA, your name still resonates in the institute and people still know who was Pascal Heß. Third, you externalize your friendliness in many ways by coming up for others, but also through your efforts to engage and create a nice and friendly and vivid community with the people with whom you work. So this externalization of your friendliness is something that is quite important. And Silke wrote to me, so how does he manage all these friendliness and all these in mix with a family life and in mix with academic research? So I am sure that both your optimism and your friendliness will show later today during the reception and during the party we'll have tonight. But dear Pascal, on behalf of Silke, I would like to congratulate you with the completion of your PhD, and I hope this marks the start of new cooperations with us, but also between ROA and IAB.
Yes. Thank you.
Dear Dr. Heß, on behalf of Maastricht University and its executive board, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. So the order now will be that we will take a picture from the corona, and of course you and your paranames, and also with our esteemed guests abroad. Next, we will leave this room, and then we'll take also a picture on the stairs just outside this room. And then we go to the rafter for the reception. Let me thank all of you for being with us today. Let me thank also the members of the Corona, especially the members abroad from Zurich and from Paris. Thank you for being with us. And now I will close this session.
Great, what are you doing now with this?
It looks pretty sweet, huh?
Yes. Yes.
Recording stopped.
Paranames, please come and join. A little bit forward. Yep. Supervisor. Please, next to the young doctor. Everybody else can join. There's a young lady taking. Standing, right? So we're going to do one session with you and one session.